Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today we're going to look at the 1983 winner of the Spiel des Jahres, or German Game of the Year. This is the 30th in my series of videos in which I'm looking at all of the winners of that award. And today we're going to take a look at one of the more popular games to have won that award. This is, again, the 1983 winner, Scotland Yard. And this is a hidden movement game in which players are going to be playing either detectives cooperating to try and capture a criminal, or the criminal himself, who's named Mr. X. And the way that this game works is that players are going to be playing on a map of London, which indicates the various travel routes that are possible throughout the city via either taxi, bus, or the subway. And using only a slight bit of information, such as random sightings of Mr. X or information about what type of transit he used, players are going to have to track down his movement and try to capture him. The catch is that normally they will not be able to see his pawn on the board. So let me take a minute to show you how this hidden movement game works, and then I'll come back and let you know what I think about it. So this is what a game of Scotland Yard in progress might look like. One player is going to be playing Mr. X, who will get this board on which he will record the spaces in which he moves in secret, as well as indicate the mode of transportation that he's used by placing these tiles. And then the other players will simply place pawns onto the board. At the start of the game, each player will draw one of these tiles that shows them a starting position, including the player who's playing Mr. X. And the object of the game is for the other players who are playing police detectives to move on to Mr. X's space. The catch is that over the course of the game, they are not able to see Mr. X except during a few select rounds. They just have to deduce where his location is based on the information that they get. So at the start of the game, each player, like I said, will place their pawn on a starting position. Mr. X will not place his pawn. Instead, he'll record his starting position by writing it down on space number 1 of this sheet. So here he would have written down 154. Then the way he's going to move for the rest of the game is whenever he chooses to move, he picks one of the 3 ways to move, which is taxi, underground, and bus, and I'll explain that in one moment, and then he places a tile on there. So, and then he'll write his destination on the next space. So here he's moved from 154 to 153 via taxi. And only Mr. X will be able to look at this board, whereas the other players will have to use the map of London to determine where he might have gone. So let me just zoom in to give you a better look at the section of the board right now here. So you could see here, hopefully, that each one of these spaces on the map is numbered, and that's where, how you'll know which space is which. And then each space has up to 3 different types of transit. So for example, this space here, 112, it's only white, and that means you could only take a taxi from it. So whenever you would take a taxi, you would spend and this would apply for both the detectives or for the Mr. X player, you would spend a taxi token like that, and each detective will start with a set number of each type of token, the taxi, the underground, and the bus, as will Mr. X. When a detective spends a taxi token, they give it to Mr. X, and that will increase his supply. When Mr. X spends it, it just gets discarded out of the game. So you will spend a taxi token, and then you will just be able to move. So from here on 112, you could trace any of the lines to an adjacent space. So for example, to 111, 100, 125, or 199, you would be able to move with 1 token. You can only ever move to the next stop along that type of transit. The next type of space here are the underground, and you can see 111 here has an underground space. It's written in orange, and you would travel along the dotted orange lines to the next location, or the next stop on that track. So even though from 111 here, this goes through all these spaces here, the next stop, which is written in orange here, is number 67. Whereas here it's 79, here it's 153, and here it's 163. So if you took underground, you would not be able to stop in between, you'd just be able to go to any of those 4 spaces. The third type, the bus, is indicated by the blue lines on the board. And again, you could only go to the next location that has a bus stop. So 111 has a bus stop, but 112 doesn't. If you took a bus from 111, you would have to go to number 100. Or, for example, if you took a bus and you went here, you could go 124. So, but it doesn't go north and south out at all from there. So using those moving restrictions, the players are going to be moving over the course of the map trying to find Mr. X, and Mr. X is going to be trying to move in a way that deceives the detective. So the way that will work in practice is, for example, here, the Mr. X player is on space 46, and you can see that because he's recorded 46 onto his board. So 46 is located right up here, and luckily there he has all 3 transit options available to him. So he might choose to take, let's just say, the underground, and to do that he would discard out one of his underground tokens, and from there he'd be able to go to 79 to, and let me just zoom out, I guess, so you could see this. So right, he would be here on 46, and he could go to down here to 79, all the way to 13, to 1, or to 74. So let's say he chose to go to 13, he would just place an underground token onto his map, inform the other players that he's using the underground, and then write his new location down. He does not have to reveal that to players. So now they just know, and generally they'll have a relative sense of where he is, but they've known that he was on a space that had access to an underground, and he's gone to another one. So after Mr. X is moved, each player in clockwise order will have to move, and they could talk amongst themselves and collaborate, plans. But for example, if this player moved from here to here, they would use a taxi token. They would just spend out their supply, give it to Mr. X. If this player moved from here to here, they would also spend a taxi token. Let's say this player moves to here, this one goes to here, and this one goes to here. And this white pawn here does not represent a player, it simply represents the last space where Mr. X was seen. Because every few rounds, and you can see these rounds are marked on the player board with this circle, so for example in round 3, in round 8, in round 13, 18, and 24, Mr. X will have to reveal his location. So that would be a full turn. And then on the next turn, let's say that the Mr. X player chose to use a bus, so let's say he went to 14, he would place a bus token here, he would write down 14, but then at the same time he would reveal to all players that he was spotted at space number 14. So now all these players are going to start sweeping toward that toward that space, and they will be able to deduce from here where he might possibly be. So if on the next turn Mr. X, for example, used a bus token, they would know he must be in space 13, in space 15, or in space 52. So if ever the players are going to collide with Mr. X, they're going to win. If Mr. X evades capture for 24 rounds, so after he reveals his last location and then all players get one last turn to move, he will win. And that's how you play Scotland Yard. Forget to mention 2 other things that Mr. X could do, actually. The first is that he has these 2 tokens, which he gets regardless of the number of players in the game. And if he wants to, during a turn, he could choose to do a double movement. And he would just discard out one of those tokens, and then he'll take 2 movements. So for example, if he took a taxi, then a bus, he would just record both moves on here and let players know which modes of transportation that he used. So he gets to do that twice during the game. And then the second thing that he gets is, based on the number of players who are in the game, he gets these black tokens here, which allow him, when he moves, to not have to reveal his mode of transport. So for example, if he was on this space 13 and he used this token, he just said, I moved, and they wouldn't know if he moved using the underground, if he used a taxi, or if he used a bus. So that would really help him try to obscure his way of movement. Also, you'll notice that here along the river, there are these black spaces that connect point to point. Using one of these tokens, Mr. X is also able to move from one of those spaces to the next. So that's just an additional advantage that Mr. X has. Alright, so that is Scotland Yard, and here I'm donning the hat that comes with the game, which is really handy for your Mr. X player, because either if you wear a hat or if you wear mirrored sunglasses, they're able to look at the board and study the board without other players able to track their eyes and figure out what part of the board they're working out, which is kind of essential for the game. I almost wish to a certain extent that this game came with a second map, maybe taking a picture and printing it out and giving that to the Mr. X player would be another possible solution. But the hat works very well for those purposes. And this is a game that I think really popularized this hidden movement mechanic, which has been picked up by several games ever since. And those have been popular games in their own right, although maybe not as popular as this, which has been a multi-million seller. And I think about games such as Letters to Whitechapel or Nuns on the Run or Fury of Dracula, which all have a very similar hidden movement mechanic, and they tend to be more complicated than this one. This one works very well with a family. You could even have a child play the Mr. X player as long as they understand the movement rules. And often, I think in most games, a lot of people will want to be the Mr. X player. It's just fun to be the odd guy out in a situation like this. And my box says that the game plays from 3 to 6 players, but I do know that you could play with 2 players, certainly, and have just one player controlling the detectives, whereas the other player controls Mr. X. Also, you could handicap it if you're playing a 2-player game or a 3-player game by having fewer detectives in the mix, and that gives Mr. X better chance. At a 6-player game, there's going to be a lot of table talk, a lot of arguments about where Mr. X might have gone, and that's all interesting because it becomes information for Mr. X. So if he knows as a group you think he went east, he's going to head west, and that's always really entertaining to sit there as Mr. X and try to keep your poker face on as players are making wrong assumptions about your movements. And this is a game that I think it rewards clever play and it rewards repeated play, because the more players play as both Mr. X and as a detective, the better they'll get. So if you're playing with players repeatedly, time and again, the level of cleverness in the moves that you're going to be making is going to increase dramatically over time. So the game it plays in about 45 minutes or so, I would say. And the box, let's see, it says it's for ages 10 and up. I think that might be about right, because it does require some forward planning. One thing that could happen in the game, which could frustrate people, is that the detectives, they get this limited supply of movement tokens at the start of the game, and they could possibly run out of those, leaving them essentially stranded. And detectives can't share movement tokens with one another. Detectives who run out with no mode of transit, if you run out of taxi tokens early on, you could just get stuck and out of the game, essentially. All that you will do is serve to block off one space on the board that has hundreds of spaces on the board. So, that does require a little bit of planning, so I would say at age 10 and up sounds about right to me. But overall, this is a very fun game. It's one that takes or establishes this hidden movement mechanism, but does it in a way that's straightforward enough that even though games have come on that have built upon it, this works so well at its core that I'm not sure that they necessarily surpass it. This game has a certain purity to it and a certain sense of purpose that make it really stand out even today. So I think it's aged pretty well among the Spiel des Jahres winners. Some people might favor a more complex game, but I actually favor the simplicity of this game. So I guess I'll leave it at that and say that is my take on Scotland Yard. Thanks for watching.